Hello and a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us today on what will be an exciting and interesting discussion about insulation. My name is Shamila Yusuf and I will be the host for today's webinar. Just a little bit about the webinar itself. As you all are aware, in lieu of the launch of the Great British Insulation Scheme in early summer, we will be exploring the insulation sector in particular and the challenges that the sector is currently facing. The Great British Insulation Scheme is, as you all know, a government scheme aimed particularly at helping people insulate their homes, making them more energy efficient and subsequently helping them save money on their energy bills. Our esteemed panelists for today are Phil Mason, who's the Head of Regulatory Engagement at TrustMark, and Dean Polly, who's the Operations Manager South for Audit and Inspection here at the BBA. Now, before I let the panelists introduce themselves, I'd just like to go over some housekeeping points. Just so that you're all aware, the webinar is being recorded, so please feel free to rewatch it or share it with a colleague. We'll upload the webinar soon after we finish. And secondly, the chat feature is enabled and moderated. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have, and our panelists will try their best to answer them towards the end of the webinar. On to the introductions quickly. Dean, would you like to start?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Dean Polly, Operations Manager for the South at the BBA's Audit and Inspection Department. I've been with the BBA approaching 10 years now, with too many years in sort of experience in the construction industry that I'd like to admit, probably. But welcome, everybody, to this session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you guys at BBA for the invite to participate. We always enjoy doing things like this. So I'm Phil Mason. I'm the Head of Regulatory Engagement with TrustMark, and I spend quite a lot of my time engaged with our government department, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, we just call it the department. Spend a bit of time speaking with Ofgem, and more recently, which has been really quite rewarding, spent some time on the road going to a number of sort of conferences around the country, really, and been having the opportunity to speak to people in person, where having a coffee or a sandwich, which has been quite nice. So I do a lot of speaking for a living. Some of you I may indeed have met, hopefully, or if I haven't, it might be nice to in the future. So thank you, and I hope you find this interesting.
Thank you, Phil and Dean. So to start off the conversation quickly, I'd just like to sort of address the need for the Great British Insulation Scheme. What, according to you, are the risks associated with poorly installed insulation?
Yeah, I'm happy enough to start that. So we've had some horror stories historically. I don't think the insulation sector, or the regulated insulation sector, is anywhere near in the same situation that it used to be. I mean, I'm sure there's a few organisations functioning that we perhaps may prefer not to be in our sector unless they change their behaviours, but the sector has changed dramatically. But some of the things that we technically have to address when we install insulation is there's a number of things, really. So there's about ensuring that we manage thermal bridging when you insulate dwellings, because you're changing the character, you're changing the dynamics of a dwelling. And a thermal bridge is really just an area which could take a number of forms. It could be areas, or it could be spots, it could be linear, it could be all sorts of different sort of arrays, where you get a cold spot, really, where heat is sort of attracted to cooler areas in a dwelling, and you run the risk where you get hot and sort of moist air meeting a cold surface of increased levels of condensation, which over time can turn to black mold. That's not good for air indoor quality. It's not good for respiratory conditions. It can exacerbate cardiac conditions as well. So the thermal bridging is one element of it. There's some levels that perhaps slightly more, I won't say that's not a practical level, but at a practical level, we've got to ensure that we don't install particularly external types of insulation in a way that we can trap water. When we think about cavity wall insulation, we've got to be concerned about the type of dwelling and the location of the dwelling that the insulation measure is going into, because in particularly high sort of west coast sort of areas of exposure, buildings have got the risk of penetration of rain, and then you get damp cavities. So it's about monitoring standard types of, well, for me anyway, and you're obviously going to need to have a view, Dean, and probably slightly more technical than mine in reality. It's about managing the workmanship, and they're known risks. They're things that have been understood and experienced.
Yeah, certainly, Phil, for a very long time, obviously with cavity wall, loft insulation, external wall insulation, etc. The key risks are clearly condensation causing mold and damp, which then leads, as you quite rightly say, to poor air quality, which can affect people's health, which is a massive risk. Subsequently, lead to damage to the property in a considerable way. And it has a habit of sneaking up on a property, and then it's sometimes too late to stop the damage early on to reduce, obviously, costs. And then there's as you said, the thermal bridging, where you get uneven fluctuations in temperatures, which will a risk, albeit perhaps slightly lower than the health and property damage. It's a negative effect on energy bills. So you might have one area of the property that's quite warm, cozy, and then other areas that are cool, and your temperatures in your house are up and down. It's three sort of prime risks. I'm sure there's a whole raft if you went into it in detail, but we probably haven't got the time to talk to it in its technicalities.
There's one area, if we think about exterior wall insulation for just specifically, I'm guessing that many of us on the call, you and I, Dean, are close to sort of PAS 2030 and PAS 2035. PAS 2030 being the certification process for businesses that work within the government-funded, capital-funded schemes and under the energy company obligation. And it changed several years ago to exclude plastic-type cappings at the top of the insulation panels where they get towards roof level, because there's a cold bridging risk, but also there's a very substantial risk of water ingress if the panels buckle, if the mastic or the silicone that's holding it in place, or the adhesive that holds it in place moves, and water runs directly down the back of the cavity wall insulation and sits in the building fabric and creates all sorts of issues. It doesn't take too much searching on the internet to see some historic horror stories, and we, like I say, I don't think we operate like that. And PAS 30 changed to as we know, changed to exclude plastic cappings, and it's about extending the roof lines over.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's really interesting, so under the funded schemes, there's a prohibition on them, although there is a test phase going through to find out if there's a way that we can use a similar yet more robust tested and tried process without causing any detriment, because the cost of extended roof lines can be considerable. But in having a drive around the town that I live in over the last couple of weeks, I can see 12 pieces of 12 dwellings with exterior wall insulation on that don't look like they've been done under funded schemes, and they use exactly plastic capping. So there's a problem there waiting to arise, really. And what the protection is if it's done under a non-funded scheme. Well, we'll talk about it in a bit, but it's not the same.
No, that is a big risk where you get sort of installs that are carried out, schemes that are carried out outside of the funded guidance of PAS 2030 and 2035. And one of the things that could cause a problem if, for example, a new system is developed and proved to be robust, fit for purpose, and then it's approved, what happens about all the properties that have been done incorrectly in the past? Do they have a big risk there where they need that done, need that rectification done? So there could be a lot of rectification work to bring it up to specification. So
I'll tell you something that's occurred to me that we haven't said that's really important. There's a maxim sort of used in the insulation sector, or be increasingly used, and I can think of its very reputable source as well, is that there is no insulation without ventilation. So what we do with overcoats, or sort of perhaps undercoats in some dwellings, which is then changing the dynamics of the building. It's changing the permeability, the breathability of the building, and consider the appropriate insulation relative to the changes of the ventilation, I should say, relative to the changes in the dwelling are so important, because if we don't get the right ventilation through a building after insulation, the risk of condensation and mold can actually be increased. So it's important that it's done very intensively and in an integrated way. We should I'll smack myself on the wrist. We should perhaps have said that from the onset, but it's there and it's a really important element of it. So I don't think that can be overstated, really.
Yeah, I mean, the risk of poorly installed insulation is so great, because you've got to ask the question, it's better to leave a property and not have it insulated in its current form than do it badly, because it could exacerbate existing problems, etc. But yeah, good point.
Moving on to my next question, which relates to skills shortages. With the lack of skills shortages within the insulation sector, how do you think can people upskill to maintain the relevance within the industry?
Okay.
I'll go. Yeah, I don't mind. I think the key there is collaboration with the manufacturers, system suppliers of different elements, whether it be cavity wall, external wall, internal wall, etc. And I know Ofqual have got a really good list of MVQs for the relevant sectors, but I think it's all about collaboration with the manufacturers, really, and the system designers to move that forward. We at the BBA, we don't currently get too involved in the training element. It's really ascertaining that the guys and girls are qualified to do the right job. Basically, if they've got the MVQ that's relevant to cavity wall, loft, etc., then I would like to say they're good to go. But obviously, a qualification held doesn't mean you're installing it correctly. I don't know what you find from the TrustMark perspective, Phil, about skill shortages. We don't really hear a lot of it at the BBA, but I think it's because it's not a stream that we go down, other than are you qualified? What training have you had?
So we've got a view, and I've got a view personally, and the point you make is right about qualification and being competent before you get to BBA and before you get to TrustMark. It's sort of pre-qualified competency is a prerequisite. But one of the things is starting to emerge is, yes, the supply chain's a challenge within the retrofit sector, although we've got a workforce that is just about covering the demand for the demand under the funded schemes and under the energy company obligation, although I think it's fairly stretched, and people do move about from scheme to scheme depending on which one they favour and which one fits their business model most appropriately, which is absolutely understandable. That's how someone runs a business. But getting out and talking to the wider construction industry, when you look at all those transferable skills that people have, the general builders have got, and the subset trades that come under construction, there are people that may not necessarily be carrying out insulation in any great volumes or to any great extent in sort of whole house type projects. But if you think about your carpenters, your carpenters and joiners, plasterers, they've all got such transferable skill sets already. They're already plying their trades. They're already familiar with working in people's homes and talking to consumers. And you could sort of argue it's just a matter of them taking the trade and the skill set and the competence that they've already got. Some may need to formalise it through the vocational qualification route, and they wouldn't necessarily find that too complicated, because it's not necessarily there to teach.
I agree.
It's there for you to demonstrate that you know how to do it, and there's
absolutely
a relatively straightforward step that I think that the construction sector could change, and we really want and need them to do it to help us meet the challenge to get to net zero. But it's such a fabulous business opportunity for them to be supporting it as well, because of all the trades and the measures that they can start to deliver as well beyond the work they currently do.
Yeah, we witnessed some of that from a BBA point of view when the Green Homes Grant scheme kicked off. There were a lot of building companies, so builders of different size personnel, contacting us to become members of BBA approved installer schemes for various systems. They've clearly got the skill sets to do it, because if you take external wall with rendering, etc., they're already doing that. But then I think what the biggest hurdle for them was that they would then have to go off and get the relevant qualifications to be able to prove competency, which they didn't want to take on that cost, because if they've got X number of people that they need to train up, etc., etc., there was an additional cost that they were going to then put into the finances.
I think it's been pretty widely recognised that the construction sector generally, so that includes retrofit, can adapt to change, but it's about the length of the policy that's in place, really, because if you're going to upskill or you're going to obtain certification to participate, then it's really about understanding what the return on investment is. And excuse me, we need slightly longer horizon, really, for people to be able to and invest and see some return for doing it as well. So, and I think that's widely recognised. I don't think anybody's in denial of that.
No, I agree. I think that there was a few instances where some of the builders that became approved installers for some insulation schemes fed back that, you know, they've spent quite an amount of money to become qualified with PAS and et cetera, and then the scheme stopped almost overnight, if you like, in someone's words that spoke to me about it. So yeah, it's longevity of schemes is probably one of the key drivers in giving the installing companies confidence to do that, certainly with builders that are moving in. So yeah, good point.
I think one of the, just very briefly before we move off that question, we've got a certificated sector of the retrofit world operating under funded schemes and working to PAS 2035, which are recognised, proven processes. Really, they haven't got the same level of traction out into the able to pay market, and
Absolutely.
that's because the understanding of perhaps your average member of the general public that isn't connected to retrofit or the funded schemes may not understand what they can do, what they need to do, how they might fund it. And I think there's perhaps a bit of work to, well, not think, there is substantial work to do to get us to be able to get the able to pay market function. There's a number of sort of moving parts that need to be unlocked. And I'm kind of extremely confident that we've got the National Retrofit Hub that launched earlier this year, which is a sort of collective of lots of people from industry. It's connected to governments, connected to the devolved nations, to look at all these moving parts, about the finance mechanisms that can be there, about the quality assurance, about the standards, about the engagement, so that we can actually get it to scale. And I think that's going to drive the opportunity as well.
Thank you. Very comprehensive. My next question is more about focusing on improving consumer protection. In what ways do you think can we then, as an industry, focus on improving consumer protection within the insulation sector?
We've got a mechanism. We're looking at each other, aren't we?
Yes.
We've got all we can go first, Dean, talk about BBA, because then we become the sort of wraparound BBA.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the ways for improving consumer protection, I think, is to start to look at a lot of the providers are stipulating that if they issue a guarantee for a particular project, the installers have to be part of an approved installer scheme, whether that be the BBA and or others stipulation. So that's one thing that I know it was looked at quite some time ago, but it wasn't enforced. But and really lobbying, probably this falls back into the second question a little bit, lobbying the government to fund installer training and qualification, probably a bit more in depth than they do at the moment. I don't know what the financial figures are, but it would be nice to sort of understand a bit more in detail at some stage of how much government are thinking of driving funding for training of individuals and companies.
So if I think about your activities as BBA, a competent person scheme, the fact you're a TrustMark scheme provider, that we work to processes that were outputs of the Each Home Counts review, which is a few years ago now, which looked at the energy efficiency sector and how we could drive up consumer protection. The vast majority of those recommendations have been implemented either through industry or through TrustMark. I think we've taken on somewhere in the region of 16 or 17 of those recommendations, which is our function. We ourselves were a recommendation of the ECHA, well, a quality mark was, and TrustMark became the function, and then that's where the connection is back through with BBA registers the so we've already got a mechanism. It's via the recognised schemes, the competent person schemes that have oversight. It's TrustMark as a wrapper that brings a level of consumer protection, a financial protection against the work, as you've mentioned, Dean, consumer protection via if something goes wrong, and people make mistakes and things do go wrong, that there's a redress process where the business can be supported in terms of what it needs to do to carry out the remediation. There's escalation processes within that. The thing is, though, as much as TrustMark is a requirement under the funded schemes and the energy company obligation, and we have thousands of tradespeople that are registered with TrustMark that don't work with those schemes, there are people out there in the world, because anybody can set themselves up as a tradesperson or a builder. Now, that's not saying that anybody doing that isn't going to necessarily do it correctly, but there will be people that don't work under any oversight, any control mechanism. And really then the consumer is either into the support of a local authority via perhaps trading standards or via building control enforcement. We know local authorities are fairly pushed at the moment in sort of all terms. They have been duration by their absolute own admission as well, because of the way the way they're funded and the services that they can deliver. So I think my summary sort of response to that question would be, it's about taking competent people that are working through recognised trade processes and control mechanisms such as BBA, such as TrustMark. There's a redress and consumer protection, substantially developed redress and consumer protection system that sits at the back of it. They don't need to worry about how it works. They just know that if something goes wrong, there's a mechanism to support and protect them.
Yeah, it's about, I think also consumer protection falls sort of hand in hand possibly with consumer confidence.
Yes.
And consumer confidence only improves when they understand what backup and support they've got, how things are being checked and monitored with the QA process, etc. So I think the two fall hand in hand, really.
I agree.
Great, thank you. What role then do you think the BBA and TrustMark can play in tackling these challenges and monitoring of standards?
I think that's $1 million question, Phil, don't you? I mean, promoting competency schemes, approved installer schemes, etc. Collaboration with warranty providers to share data is really important. I think, you know, the fact that the industry's had bad press for varying reasons, it needs to be supported from all quarters. So from government down, you know, you can't just blame the installers and you know, for the bad jobs when they've not had some support and training and guidance. You know, I'm sure there's been lots of instances where they haven't had a level of training and support, where the monitoring hasn't been as great as it should be. You know, the quality assurance, you can only check what you see. I'm not suggesting for a minute that I think it'll ever get to every single job is checked, but if we can,
it doesn't need to either. It needs to. What I mean, the approach that we take is going to be one that's very close to the one that you do as a certification body as well. Yeah. We monitor by risk. So if we know that there are complicated projects, that doesn't mean to say that they will go wrong. That just means to say that there is a little bit more risk in it that requires management. So we tend to look at more complicated risk projects or measures. We look at the history of businesses to make sure that when somebody's got a known history, so it's probably not the best term to use, but we tend to front load so that we get confidence very quickly. Then when we've got confidence, we can step back a little bit. You don't need to look at every single piece of work that's carried out from it. You just dip in to make sure the standard's being delivered. And then that word about confidence, customer confidence, I think government confidence is really important as well, because it's not about finding something wrong then being critical about it. It's about if something is found non-compliant, which could be a range from just a process down to actual workmanship delivered on a site. It's about supporting business through, trying to identify with them a root cause and helping them to get where they need, if they need help. I mean, we sort of strayed slightly into the negative, because there are some there are some exceedingly reputable businesses delivering first-class work.
Absolutely.
And because somebody isn't under BBA and somebody isn't under TrustMark, that doesn't mean to say that they're not. It
Yeah,
just means
exactly.
there may not be a mechanism quite the same way for somebody independently say, you see that, that's great.
Yeah, I think I mean a lot of these questions and answers, if you like, or our interpretation of the answers are sort of intrinsically linked. I mean, you make the point about government confidence there. If surely, you know, if the government want a certain standard, they will need to invest in supporting the people that provide the various tiers of the whole project, from the installers to the suppliers to the monitoring bodies, certification bodies, etc. So
Actually, one thing that we do need to unlock, we've recently got a sort of small department that's engaged with the financiers and the banks, because I mean, there are a lot of people that have got a lot of money to release. They just want to be sure that they're mitigating their risks. So if we can help those people lend money into the marketplace as true sort of green finance mechanisms, and I'm not, the Green Deal springs to mind. I think the principle of the Green Deal was extremely good in terms of you save what you spend, so a householder is not actually in any negative position financially. Perhaps the quality that delivered and the complexity behind it was a little bit more than some people wanted to engage with or perhaps could understand. But as soon as we can get the finance community world to be further, I mean, they're pretty engaged now, but to be further engaged and risk mitigate, the more it's easier for a consumer to understand how they can finance retrofitting it. Of course, that drives the requirement. But again, that's all about confidence. So it's a good point.
Yeah, definitely.
While we talk about challenges, there's a good question that's come through from James. He asks, with regards to loft insulation, what are the common issues you see when it comes to product installation?
Oh, yeah, that again, there's probably quite a few common problems there. Which, you're talking about risk. Obviously, there's the safety risk where heavy duty cables get covered over, downlights get covered over that are not fire rated or they haven't got caps on them. One of the real common problems that we've seen at the BBA over the years is literally installing the insulation into the eaves to stop airflow. And it goes back to what Phil was explaining earlier, that insulation, when it's installed in a property, needs to have the correct amount of ventilation. So the moment you block the eaves, you're getting some serious problems rising there. That's of course unless you're changing it into a warm roof, which is a different kettle of fish altogether. But if you're talking about, James is referring to standard floor loft insulation of mineral fiber quilt type products, yeah, that's probably one of the biggies. Insulating, also not as far enough into the eave. It's almost like, well, you can't win, guys, isn't it? Some of the installers are probably saying.
It's about if there's any form of wall insulation, it's about the interconnection of the measures as well. A common pitfall that we see is people just forget to insulate the loft hatch. They've done everything properly. They've made sure the ventilation is right. There's the right depth, the right method of rolling out the insulation. They've done the lagging. There's anything that's required. They've modified all the things with the electrics, and then they drop the roof down, and then we go sometimes. And we don't regard this as it's not an installation failure. It's just a non-compliance because it's an easy thing to remediate, and it's simply. I don't think anybody thinks we're going to do all this good work, but then deliberately not insulate the loft hatch. I think it's just something that just, we packed up, we're coming down, we're all getting our overalls off, and then we drop the hatch down, and it gets overlooked occasionally. It's a really small thing, though. And
it could also, again, I don't know what the figures would be, percentages, but it could also be there's an element of the lack of training for the guys who are installing it in the loft. There's a tradition of you when you move into the insulation industry, you start to follow your colleagues, watch what they do, learn from them. So read into that what you will, but if you're learning from somebody who's doing a really good job, then hopefully you're going to do a really good job. If you're following somebody who's not doing a good job that you don't know it's not a good job, then you can sort of put 2 and 2 together and get 84 out of that one. But it's training. I think you're right. There's definitely a loft hatch situation in there, especially in areas where you've got the loft hatch has got an attached ladder, etc., etc. But there's lots and lots of things that you can do to overcome them. So, but yeah,
interesting. It makes me feel like I want to go upstairs and check if my loft hatch is so.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't say I've got the same urge.
Yeah, that's a good question from James. So thank you.
The next question is from Tom. He's also asking about issues, but he says, what about issues with suspended floor insulation, particularly sprayed, especially if solid floor elements, kitchen only, reducing cross flow?
I'm not quite sure what did you say it was Tom, Shamela?
Tom, yes.
Yeah.
Issues with suspended floor insulation, particularly sprayed.
Yeah, I mean that's not something we come across within the BBA approved installer schemes, to be fair. So I can't really answer that. I can give
We've got some experience around those. Now, I'm not a technical expert on underfloor insulation, but it is about ensuring that the floor that is to be insulated with whichever material that is used, because it's one measure but can be done in different ways. That the timber is of the right moisture content to start off with, that you're not sealing moisture into timbers and exacerbating sort of expediting decay. And something else that we've come across is there needs to be a cross flow of ventilation under.
Yeah, definitely.
And that can be a challenge in some dwellings because of the way that they're built. And it might be that you can't actually get to 2 sides to put ventilation in without modifying the building. And I think the sort of pretty common example of it is, if I think about not necessarily Victorian, but if I say Victorian terraced houses that have suspended floors but then concrete floor kitchens at the back, the actual method by which cross-flow ventilation can be installed is a little bit more complicated. Now, I think under the funded schemes, there's so much guidance around it, and there's been so much experience from the past that going forward, we don't see much of it. But we see it this value, because when we go and do quality assurance, it'll be the same as you do, where we aim at risk. We're trying to find issues, not to go out to upset people, but to find issues so that we can manage compliance accordingly. So you can get a mixed result depending on how you inspect, and that's what I think we're there to do, is to find those issues and then support the remediation of it. But out there in the world where there may not be the same level of oversight, something like that could go undetected for a number of years, and depending on the conditions, the decay of the flooring joists can occur relatively quickly. So if that work has got no oversight and no one's picking up an issue and it wasn't installed correctly in the first place, that's quite a significant problem, lack of ventilation in the floors, as ventilation is important.
Yeah, I mean, did Shamela, did Tom mention concrete suspended floors?
No, he just said suspended floor insulation. Tom, if you can just
my mistake.
Clarify. Yeah, we'll wait for Tom to clarify if he's talking about concrete suspended.
I misunderstood. Tom said concrete floors, but Phil's 100% right what he's just explained there. We not so much recently, but in the past, whilst carrying out utility funded site inspections, there were quite a few concerns with moisture content, etc. So
okay, fair enough. So then my last question, we'll move on. What can we do to focus on improving quality workmanship within the sector?
Shall I go first, Phil? I'll jump in quick.
Go on then.
I think we need to seriously look at probably the percentages of both work in progress and post-installation QAs. I think collectively, of all the certification bodies and organisations that carry out QAs on insulation installs, it would be nice to know how many are done in total across the whole spectrum of organisations that carry that out. I don't know whether there is any figures on that, Phil, because obviously increasing the number of inspections will hopefully sort of improve quality and also gain a lot of data to provide feedback across all parts of the sector, from installers right through to certification bodies, insurance back guarantee and warranty providers.
Data sharing, that's so we, as we'll know, but and some of us on the call may, but some of us may not. Part of, I'll go back to the Each Home Counts review. One of the recommendations was that there needed to be a data warehouse for the energy efficiency sector. So that was funded back by government at the time in quite a simplistic form, enough to get it off the ground, because lodgement in the data warehouse was a requirement under the energy company obligation, ECO 3 at the time. And the data warehouse has grown considerably in terms of its functionality, the way that data is input and operability, and it's linked back to PAS 2035. So we don't control the process. We need to map the lodgement process back against the PAS, although we do have wider lodgement process as well, and there'll be more coming on stream. But one of the things that we do through the data warehouse lodgements that are related to certification bodies are share the data volumes back with the certification bodies. We don't share. We only share the data that's relevant to that certification body, because we've got to be careful about confidentiality as well. So, and then data sharing arrangements have developed, and they will continue to develop. So we share data back with our government department. We share data back with Ofgem. We've started sharing data back with UCAS because the volumes of data that we have in the data warehouse are linked to payment. Because under the funded schemes, if there's no lodgement, then payment doesn't follow through. So that's going to be a pretty accurate number, because I know that some suggestion and comment from the sector that there may be of underreporting at certain stages, and there's probably a temptation for that. We can now close that down because we share data back with certification bodies. Everybody knows what their quotas are, but like I say, we only share the data that's relevant to the certification body, but we share the stuff back to UCAS. So UCAS have a slightly sort of helicopter view, should we say, of what goes on, so that the monitoring can be set at the right percentages. But you drive a really good point that post-completion monitoring is great for a number of reasons, but you can't see anything that's now been concealed. So front-end assessment of a dwelling, and the PAS has changed actually recently, hasn't it? Last month or the month before, in order to require slightly different independent assessment of building inspections before work carries out, to make sure the building's suitable to do it. That's a really positive step in making sure that we don't have errors and we can mitigate those collectively. I mean, in progress monitoring is really important. Not quite so easy because people move around. And then post completion but it's a blend of all of those that seems to work.
Yeah. I think as well, one of the things is that people, organisations like certification bodies, TrustMark, etc., can do is emphasise that the standards are at a minimum requirement, and that we need to encourage, the ethos of going above and beyond that standard to improve customer confidence and the levels of quality.
I've got a rhetorical question based on all this to ourselves collectively, and I'm not sure if we can actually genuinely answer it in the duration that we've got. That's what happens under certification and under TrustMark. If people are out there doing work where they should be following the building regulations, but it's not through a competent person scheme, or it doesn't get reported to a local authority building control department or an inspector, there's a position that work could look, it might be perfectly acceptable. We have to recognise the fact that because people don't come through our schemes, that doesn't mean to say they don't do it properly, because that won't be true in a number of instances, but it's unknown, and there will be people that don't fall under any oversight whatsoever, and they're free to do whatever they want, and the poor old consumer will only know about it if it's found by somebody else or when something goes wrong, and then they're back into the to see if building control can support them, if there's some enforcement action, if the business even still exists and they know who it is. You're talking to trading standards, those departments are pushed again, or someone's back out into the judicial system even if the business is still around. So in the outside world, and I'm not criticising the principles and standards that already work, but if they're not being applied, the standards just will not be known. And that's why I think that the public need to be using recognised schemes that protect them.
Absolutely. I think one of the issues that I've seen over the years is that there's a level of misunderstanding, ambiguous, it's ambiguous information, interpretation of building regulations. So the installer carries out a job, does a really good job. There's something that's not quite right. It might be the DPC level is not quite 150 mil, and it's not been addressed. And building control have signed it off. So then there's becomes a little bit of a bum fight between not even three parties, because building control have been and gone. They've had no more input, and then that can lead to not necessarily a problem with workmanship, the quality of the workmanship, but just the way that the detail has been carried out. And then that goes all the way back to the consumer confidence is not quite there, because they then get worried that the guys have done a brilliant job, but building control said, yeah, you can do that, when certain standards say you can't. So it can be very difficult for the installers at times, and that's where dialogue and collaboration comes in. Very good point.
Tom's just come back and clarified that he's talking about speaking about suspended timber, so issues with suspended timber insulation, where the solid.
Hopefully we answered the right question.
Yeah. I agree with what Phil said there. Initially, I didn't know. I thought Tom was talking about concrete suspended floors, but we have seen a lot of spray foamed or fiber insulation bats type thing, Kingspan, and it's not so much the issue with what they're doing with the products and how they're doing it, how they're applying it. Is twofold. It's the moisture level in the timber and the existing condition of the timber. Some of them are rotten in the first place, so shouldn't be doing it in the first place. But also the key is the airflow, and very, very difficult to fix that problem based on what Phil has explained earlier.
Cross channel underneath solid area may have been built at the same time, but the danger is will get blocked internally when the spraying is done.
Yeah,
there's a comment by Malcolm. He says, as is the case here, it is often that bodies involved in the retrofit insulation only look inwardly and discuss their own concerns, whereas we should be considering how we involve the public and sell the ideas of insulating their homes, whether funded or not. They are bemused by the variety of schemes and bodies involved, if of course they even get to hear of them.
That's a really good point. Yeah, really, really, really good point, because educating the public. You've got different levels of understanding of what the whole process is. Some people have no clue, and the other end of the spectrum, some people are very, very clued up. So it's a really good point.
I've got an observation. If I walk where I live in the road I live in, if I walk, actually it's that way, there's been a lot of construction work carried out, retrofit work to old dwellings. This is quite an old house, and pretty substantial. All the ceilings down, all the plaster rewired, the floors out, the whole lot. And occasionally when I walk down the road, I have a chat to the builders, because you get to know them quite well when you walk up and down the road with a little dog. And I ask about the insulation. I use this story quite a lot. So Dean, you're sort of smiling, you might have heard it. Apologies, and anybody else has. But I walk down the road, and when you always say good morning and good evening, and then I say, where's the insulation there? And I get a bit of a blank look sometimes, because the consumer hasn't asked for it. The architect or the project manager may not have specified retrofit insulation beyond the minimum requirement of meeting building regulations at the time of doing a renovation. And so it doesn't go in, and that's the point of least resistance. The skips are there, the scaffolds there, the painters and the decoration, all the remediation trades are on site. And I tend to say, well, when your customer finds out in 5 years that they could have had a lot of insulation put in before the plastering, the redecorating, the skirting, the plumbing, the wiring all happened, they're not going to be very happy. And sometimes when I go along, I'm not sure I'm making myself particularly popular, but some of them say, we've had a little chat, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it's about, and the question is absolutely right. If the public don't know what to ask for, or particularly the public that are funding their own renovations, they won't ask for it and the opportunity's missed. And I think there's a big educational piece, and I'll go back to the National Retrofit Hub, if I might. Part of the brief of the Natural Retrofit Hub is about that process. How do we get the public aware? What drives it, other than people approaching eligible families and households under funded schemes to say, do you know what, if you want it, you can have this because you've got eligibility. And we need to go out into the much wider world, and that needs an educational piece around it that I'm sure will be developed, and I'm sure there's people working on it, but it needs to perhaps be expedited a little bit. It needs to be quite a broad piece as well.
Yeah, I think certification bodies for sure, and installers can play a big part in developing that, you know, as part of a steering group probably. So
it's promoting additional services as well while you work it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question.
So where do you think, just thinking, where do you think the responsibility then lies in terms of educating consumers about?
I would say everybody that's involved in the industry, personally. You know, how that works in the grand scheme of things, I don't know, but you know, we need to work with the installers, certification bodies, guarantee providers, funders, TrustMark organisation. You know, it needs to be, everybody needs to be part of it.
It's a nationally collaborative campaign, I think, really. A lot of people, that question comes up, and a lot of people often say, we did a great big campaign when we had the Olympics in London a few years ago to make it, to really promote it, to get people to want to go and be engaged and see and understand it and enjoy it. And a number of people put the same comparison forward. Do we need something like an Olympic campaign? But I don't think we can all look at one another to do it. We're all involved with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It will also, that sort of campaign, not an ongoing, I don't think it should just be a one-off. I think as things develop, it should be
ongoing,
growing, ongoing. And it'll also hopefully affect the sort of consumer confidence level that it takes away from the very bad press that's happened over the past years, and take it back into a more understandable and hopefully confidence building process.
Fair enough. There's another question from James. He says, you mentioned earlier that it is key to collaborate with insulation manufacturers. In your opinion, what does this include?
Well, basically, when you're installing products, I'd like to think that you've had some sort of training or conversations with the technical people of that product. Certainly with the systems, like external wall, cavity wall, internal wall, etc., are usually governed by, you have to have some form of training from the manufacturers in that case. The danger is when you can go to, take loft insulation, for example, you can go to even B&Q and buy some, or Wix or different places that other suppliers can be used to install that. So, you know, there's no difference to the home user doing it themselves, the DIY aspect. But the dialogue, I think, should be to reach out to the people who manufacture the products and go from there and ask them for support and ask them for help. From experience, they nearly all want to help and support because they're proud of their products. So,
any thoughts?
I agree. Understand the product you're using, the way the system's been designed to be installed, because they are designed as systems with interacting materials, and the lifetimes are considered within it. Because I think the chances are, if there's lack of education and somebody mixes their own system constituents, fixings and boarding and coating and waterproofing methods, if that isn't done in an integrated way, it only takes one of those components to be a weak link where potentially you've got a failure of the system. And I think the people that design it and the people that manufacture it they're the people that know how it should be used.
And then the problem there, the knock-on effect of that, Phil, which is a really good analogy, is that the blame culture, if you like, of it's not my part of the product, it's not my part of the product that's failed. You know, it's so where does the liability sit? Unfortunately, it'll sit with the installer, but because if they've put the wrong component in, then they've put the wrong component in. But equally, the training and the support from the system suppliers and manufacturers will hopefully encourage them not to do that.
There's an interesting question that's just come in from Stephen. He says, should insulation packaging not show that ventilation should also be carried out if it is not already in situ?
Could you mind if I jump in and answer that? I've got,
of course.
a view about it. Whether everybody will agree with it or not. So I go back to, I've worked with TrustMark for 6 or 7 years. I can't believe it's been such a quick, busy and extremely enjoyable 6 or 7 years. It's gone so quickly. So prior to that, I came out of the energy industry. I came from the gas industry. And for years and years and years, carbon monoxide campaigners, where there've been carbon monoxide injuries because you're burning a fossil fuel, campaigned and successfully to get warnings put on appliances, to get warnings put on charcoal bags and fuel sources, that ventilation for combustion was a requirement. And that's become quite a widespread message now, but it took several years and some very determined people to be able to get the industry together. And it's an industry initiative to say, that's what we're going to do, because we don't want any of our products to impact on someone's health or well-being. So there's a principle already being created, and it's not about demonizing a product or a fuel. It's about saying, when you use this, this insulation should be. Do you know, that's the first time that I think I've ever heard anybody suggest that for the retrofit sector. It's something that's actually worth thinking about, because it's driving a really good positive message as well.
Yeah,
so it's
good observation. Yeah, I think one of the without wanting to come across as being negative, is one of the kickbacks to that, which would be from the manufacturers who ultimately are putting the labels on the packaging, would be, where do they stop? Because if they just spoke about ventilation, what about all the other aspects that need to be done? Because some people might read that as that's all we need to do. I'm not saying that's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but having said that, my personal view is it's a really good idea, and it's a start. You know, you've got to start somewhere. You can't just say we can't do it because of somebody might misunderstand that and misinterpret it. And again, about communication, isn't it? So I think it's a really good point. I'm not sure where that could be taken actually, and who that would be.
An industry sort of thinking process.
Yeah.
Making that observation.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Not sure what the answer is, but good question.
So then Stephen says, direct consumers to the TrustMark website and link to coordinators, etc. I don't know if it's a comment in regards to.
So that we can do that. We've got find a tradesperson facility. So if somebody knows who they're looking for, the trade they're looking for, in the area that we're in, then we've got a search facility that already does that. If somebody isn't able to use the search facility on the website, they can always contact us by telephone, or they can always ask somebody else to do a check for them, and then we can help them find the tradespeople that they need. And that's, thanks for that question, because that's part of the reason that TrustMark is here. And what we want and need to do is, we've got a very substantial installer base at the moment, which sits at, and it fluctuates as most registration schemes. I think that sits at about 15,500 tradespeople, covering something in the region of about 130, 40 trades, I believe it is. And we want to grow that base, and we're actively doing something now in the background, and we've always done it, and we'll continue to do it, and we need to do more of it to increase the TrustMark registered installer base, so people around the country can more straightforwardly find a registered business that's coming through one of our scheme providers like you as BBA, and then people can find more local tradesmen more frequently. And I think that's part of the challenge of the construction sector sort of supply chain shortage, as well as the retrofit sector shortage. One of the similar sort of things, because our challenge is to grow those numbers. That's our mission as well.
I think it goes back to as well where the homeowner or the property owner, if they don't know where to go in the first place, you know, that's where the whole communication thing comes about it. Obviously, TrustMark, government, etc., can push that aspect through many different platforms, far greater than you know, say certification bodies like the BBA, etc. But it's good to know that people are asking these questions. So this has been really good. That was a good question again.
I think he's just sort of clarified again that I think what he's talking about is where if that insulation manufacturers then say for independent advice on your insulation measure, you put it on the packaging and then you can redirect them to, for example, the TrustMark website or the linked coordinators.
Right. Okay.
And that's I'm happy enough to take that away internally to see how we might progress that, because we're naturally and sort of understandably, as you probably imagine, quite connected to the sector, and it might take more than just a TrustMark approach. But I think that's something that we can take away and start thinking about how you link things together in a better way. I mean, there is quite a link. There's quite a link sort of system at the moment, but you can always improve things so that people can find. One of the things that didn't take off particularly well as a result of the Each Home Counts review was this independent advice service, or the need for advice to be delivered. There's quite an enhanced facility available on the government website that the general public can go to understand a bit about what they can do to their home in terms of measures. About you enter in some fairly straightforward information, and it gives you some relatively high level information back to inform a consumer. But there's always room for improvement in that journey. And it was a recommendation of the Each Home Counts review that the industry hasn't really taken forward in the way that was intended. So I think there's awareness of it already. But I like the comment. I'm going to take that. I won't claim it as mine, but I'd like to be connected to it, because I think it's clever.
No, I think as an independent consumer, if I were to go to a builder's merchant and to get for example, an insulation product off the shelves, and if that sort of disclaimer is up on the product, I'd know where to go, or how to navigate it, rather than just having someone else just come.
More connected. I agree. So somebody says, "Oh, because some people don't know what question to ask." But if you take it on a journey, it either gives you the information that you need, or at least gives you the information if you think, right, now I know what I've got to do next, or I know what I've got to ask. It's a simple concept, and simple concepts are often the most effective.
And can be very powerful, can't they? Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Stephen, for that wonderful. Yes, okay. So he adds on to you have it both on the product and the information sheets and the QR codes. You have it. So there's plenty of opportunities out there, and I think it's a very good point that Stephen's made. Thank you for Stephen for getting us all thinking caps on. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today for this webinar. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Dean, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and all the questions. Have a lovely rest of the day. And this session has been recorded again, I will reiterate. So it will be up on the website as soon as possible. And so please feel free to watch and share it with your colleagues. And I will catch you all soon again, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for the questions. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.